Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the Sons of Horus from the Horus Heresy, sort of the titular bad guys here. Now I saw some advice recently on Reddit that said you couldn't all over wash a Marine, and being as that's how I pretty much exclusively paint my Space Marines, I was a little surprised, and I decided it was time to push that to its logical extreme and crack out the dip again. Now this is a technique which goes back quite a few years actually, and what I'm going to use today from the army painter, the Quickshade Dip, folks used to use actual wood staining stuff, so maybe you can give that a shot as well. There'll probably be some advice for that online. I just like the Quickshade Dip for the fact I know what I'm going to get out of it. Now the Sons of Horus are something that I have done on the channel before, but it's been a good long while. It's been years actually. And I figured because there's been new miniatures, new paints and all that sort of thing, it might be worth revisiting them and seeing if there was an easier way to get them to the table. And I think, yeah, I've cracked it. So all the paints for this will be listed in the description below, same as always. Let's get into it. So the first thing to do once your miniature is assembled is to hit it with a primer spray. Now I've used here ash grey from the army painter. Any light grey will do the job. You could use uniform grey. Mechanica Standard Grey from Citadel might be a little bit dark for what we're going to do. Likewise, you could probably use Grey Seer as a replacement there instead. So you've got lots of options. Light grey, nice and simple. So I've got my mid-Feldgrau on my palette over here, and I'm going to use this as the large dry brush. Again, this is another Army Painter one. It goes over nice and smooth, but for a solid color, what I'm going to do is come back once this is dried and give it a second. Now, the reason why I'm using this particular brush is because the wedge tip on it is actually really helpful for getting into some of the nooks and crannies. We're not going to have to really do much with these paint-wise once the paint, or the base coat rather, is dried, but we can jam up in there nice and easily with this brush. Doesn't matter too much what you're using though, as long as it gets paint on. As you can see, I'm not too fussed if I hit things like as bolter or as equipment. It's not going to matter one jot because we're painting those later. If you want a similar color, maybe slightly darker and a little bit more rich, slightly more green, then Evergreen Fog is a good replacement for that. What I'm going to use now, this is Fiery Vermilion. Man alive, it is bright, which is the reason why I'm using it. This is from the John Blanche paint set. I'm going to paint in his eyes now because as you can see, I've already made a god-awful mess of his faceplate. There's some slight dripping there that looks very new romantic. But we're going to move on to the bronze details. Now for this I'm actually going to use True Copper. This is quite close to Balthazar Gold from Citadel. And yeah, this one covers... I tend to find this does cover a little bit better than Greedy Gold, so it's my choice for this kind of slightly deeper, more sinister kind of bronze. So again, don't worry too much if you do splurge over the edges just a bit. But at this stage, try and be a little more careful as you're applying it. Now I do find on some of the flatter areas, it's worth coming back and giving that a second coat once the first one is dry thoroughly. What I'm going to turn to now is gunmetal, and we're going to paint in the silver bits. Now for this, I like to use a kind of raggedy old synthetic brush, one of those cheap ones you can pick up in the stationery aisle, because as you can see, I'm just going to jam it on, and anywhere that I want to, I can get pretty brutal with it and not worry that I'm ruining, a nice brush. Now I'll use leather brown to paint in, funnily enough, is leather equipment. I want a little bit more on my brush there. And then we paint in the black details to finish off the base coats. Now here I'm going to use strap grey. This is actually a very dark grey. It's not a true black. And it comes in the German paint set as well. So if you've got the Feldgrau, you'll probably have this too. Now this I'm using because instead of a pure black, when we add the dip over the top of this, we shade it. There's a little that it can actually do. A flat black is always going to look like a flat black, whereas this has got just a hint of lightness to it. And when we shade it, it'll look a little bit more interesting, I think, than a flat black would. So that's my choice. That's my reasoning anyway. You can just use a black. So I'm going back now to my mid-Feldgrau, and I'm just looking for the little bits where I have splurged over certain areas. This is a tidy up step. Now I did remember too to come back in with a little bit of that bronze color and just painting the rounds in his magazine because it looks cool. Now what I'm going to do is to take him outside and actually hit him with a varnish at this stage. Now the short answer to the question, is this necessary, is probably not, but. And that but is that I have had in the past, whether using the dip or acrylic washes, Agrax Earthshade, Darktone, anything, I have occasionally lifted up very thin layers of paint from my base coats. So because I'm going to be using something which I will, be using thinners to actually peel off if I need to, I reckon it's worth the 2 seconds it takes to go outside, varnish this dude. I'm going to use Munitorum varnish from Citadel because it is a satin varnish. And yeah, save the time, because honestly, if you do have that one outlier scenario happen where you're undoing your hard work, it's a bit of a pain in the neck, let's say. So for 2 seconds of prep work, let's go varnish them. So while that varnish settles and dries, what I'm going to do is prep up my strong tone. Now, don't shake it. Reason being is that you're going to introduce a whole bunch of bubbles into the mix, and you really don't want that. That's just going to make things more difficult. So what I'm going to do is slowly lever off the lid here. Just work your way around slowly and carefully until it pops loose. Now, once it does, lift it up close to horizontal as you can and pop it aside on a bit of kitchen towel. Again, if you shake that, what's going to happen is you're going to get the mix inside hitting the underside of this, and it will form this gunky crust around the inside of the rim, which will eventually make it difficult to close. So avoid that if you can. It's nice and simple. Grab yourself a rangy old brush, something you're not using anymore, and this is how we're going to stir it up. You'll see at first it's quite oily, but as you do stir, you'll feel a little bit of gumph at the bottom of the pot. Just take your time to wiggle around that a few times until you get a nice solid brown color. Now leave your stirring stick in there, because I suggest that every time you finish base coating one marine, go ahead and give it another stir. Just keep that stuff mixed. So I've got another rangy old brush. What I'm going to do is load it up fairly generously, and we start applying this over our marine. Now this is going to look dreadful going on. Like, look at that goop. But keep the faith. Work it into all of the recesses as quick as you can. And then once it's had a couple of seconds to settle, you'll see it does flow across the miniature a little bit better. So you're applying it very similarly to how you would an acrylic wash, but it is very not acrylic. You want to have something that you can clean oil-based stuff out of a brush with. So turpentine, white spirits, methylated spirits, if that happens to be what you've got where you are. Now see this, I've got way too much in there. So I'm going to start spreading it across my dude, and when I need some more, I'll just come back, pluck it up out of there, and shift it around. Now as long as you're in a sort of room temperature room, and you've given it a couple of seconds to shift and settle and smooth out on the figure, you'll get something that looks like this. Now any big areas where it's collecting still, like on the back of his shoulder pad here, I'll shift a little bit of that away. Now don't wipe the inside of the tin with your brush. Have a little bit of kitchen towel to the side where you can pop off any excess. As well, any bits where you get a little bit of streaking, what you can do is with your brush still damp, like still have a little bit of wash in there, just run smoothly along there and you'll clear off any tide marks and what have you. It's really, really easy to do. I do still recommend, if you're doing this for the first time, just do it on one marine, see what you like the look of, and you can practice, take your time. Don't ruin 20 guys just because you saw me do it once, Okay, now there is our dipped marine. Now the question does come up occasionally, if it's called the dip, then why am I not actually dipping it? And there are a couple of reasons. First is that I find it a little bit wasteful. If you are taking your miniature, dipping it in the pot and then shaking off all of the excess, all that excess you're flicking away into the garden or wherever you're doing it, that could have gone on another marine. I think it is a perfectly valid method, and it is one of the ways that Army Painter recommends you can do it. Good for churning out bulk infantry, but like I said, I think it's a waste of good material. The second is control. Being able to apply it with a brush means I have more control over where it goes, and as you saw with this pack here, I can pull some of it away while it's still wet. And as well, on a very strange personal note, once upon a time when I was actually dipping and then flicking these guys, I did it with such vigor that I tore my rotator cuff. So the risk of injury is slim, but it has happened to me. So bear that one in mind. I like to apply it with a brush. You're probably not going to break yourself if you do dip it though. So what the literature recommends now is to leave this guy to cure for 24 to 48 hours. I find the longer the better. What I am going to do though, is because I don't have that kind of time, is pop him up in the sun and hope. We're going to come back after this has had a couple of hours to cure, so if it goes funny, I'll know why. But do not do what I'm about to do. Let it cure properly. So after a couple of hours in the sun, here's what we have. Now the best way to show you what this actually does is to flick him around and look at his leg here. It's quite glossy, kind of a trick to get this on the camera. But as it dries, what the dip does is to shrink and tighten, kind of similarly to how contrast and speed paint do. So what you'll see, particularly on these smaller flat panels, is that the dip, it kind of gravitates towards the center of the flat panels, and you get a very subtle sort of shrinkage and then a highlight towards the edges. Now, it's not as pronounced as if you were to go in there with a brush and do it yourself, but it is kind of cool. I like what the dip does on flat surfaces like this. It is definitely a style choice though, so if you don't like how it looks, sticking to a normal acrylic wash, you could pop marine juice or something over the top of this, it will work perfectly well. But I quite like that. So what I'm going to do now, if you have got any transfers, apply them now at this stage while the surface is still nice and glossy. Okie dokie, so that's had another hour or so of drying time. You'll see the transfers have shrunk in and tightened as well. I've also popped a little bit of the base on there just to speed things up a little. So, now I'm going to take him outside and hit him with a varnish. Now, for Marines, I kind of like a satin finish, so I am going to use Munitorum varnish again, but you can use whatever you like. If you prefer a high gloss, you might even leave them like this, but I do recommend a matte or a satin varnish is going to probably look better. It worked! I will take dumb luck if that's what I get. We have there the nice smooth finish that the dip has given us. It's a little bit dulled down by the varnish, but as you see, it's not completely flat. The difference there would be if you used a matte varnish, it would be a little less glossy than it is. The satin, like I said, my choice for a Space Marine. What I've got now is a little bit of packing foam, just popped in between the ends of tweezers. This is going to be our brush for some weathering. So I've got here some oak brown, and what I'm going to do is dab most of this off onto a little bit of kitchen towel, and we'll use this to add a bit of weathering to our Marine. So let's try here on the edge of his leg. So just little dots of this in areas that are likely to see some wear. This is just the same as weathering a vehicle, really. So you don't want to add very much of this, just enough to add a bit of texture to some of these areas. Now that's a little more subtle on camera than it is in reality, but try not to go overboard with it because it will look overdone very quickly. What I've got is a rough, raggedy old brush, and I have some light Feldground here. What I'm going to do is a very similar method, just stipple near some of those chips. I'm going to stipple quite lightly on top of and around those bits of chipping to make it look like there's a third dimension there. Once again, don't go nuts with this. And then the last thing to do is a couple of highlights. I've got here plate mail metal. What I'm going to do is just use the edge of my brush to pop a little bit of this along some of the silver details. And as well, just little dibbly dabs of it on the black too, to give us a bit of a chipped, uneven appearance. That way we don't have to break out any grey paint. And then for a few edges and corners on the brassy bits, I'm going to use here true brass. Now this is quite bright, so be sparing in how you apply it, otherwise you'll very quickly look almost silver. Now matte varnish actually works better on camera, so I am going to take them outside and hit them with a matte. But I would recommend, if you like how the satin varnish looks when you do it at home, stick with that. I'm also going to finish off his base, and the recipe for that will be in the description. Yeah, let's get a look at our dipped Legionary once he's all done. And so, there at last, our Sons of Horus Legionnaire is complete, and I'm pretty happy with that result. I would suggest, if you want to make the most out of how the dip works, to have 10 or 20 guys sort of prepared to that base coat stage before you go ahead and spend the time mixing it up and getting it prepared, because you'll save some time overall by sort of doing it the long way and getting, like I say, about 20 fellas at a time is probably ideal. I have actually speed painted an entire American bolt-action army, 64 miniatures in a week, using the dip, so it's not as if it doesn't have some precedent. It's pretty good stuff. Now, this method will also work if you choose to go with something like Cyberic Green from Citadel, Evergreen Fog, from the Army Painter, or if you like the darker green of Gunship Green from Vallejo. Whatever Sons of Horus green you like the look of, I'm pretty certain that Strong Tone is going to be the right choice. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and dip, including my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. I mean it every single time I say it. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked down there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.